Okay. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullah and good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Ramadan Mubarak. Hopefully you're enjoying your Ramadan and you're able to focus also in your studies, inshallah. Okay, so for today's session, like I said, 2 weeks ago I gave you all a task based on a particular article. The article was the article problematized this construct called world literature, or specifically Anglophone world literature. It was published about 3-4 years back, so it's still quite relevant to our context and how we view world literature. And this idea of world literature is also something that we want to kind of like consider. I just want to start by listening to your take on the idea of world literature based on this article. So who would like to go first? Yes.
Yes, Doctor.
Sorry?
Yes, Doctor. Start.
Yeah, so who would like to go first?
Yes, Doctor.
Go ahead, Salim.
Okay. So I made some points, in fact, about the article. So the points are usually deal with the world literature. And world literature become very famous, around the world, in spite of the criticism it faced because of some ambiguity, or some vagueness, and it becomes just like as a commodity. So the criticism was that that world literature became a kind of a commodity, and it is specified, or focused in Western countries in particular. Some scholars want to say that world literature encourage a kind of domination. So this domination of Western countries, and others says it wasn't a world literature. Okay, for example, Stanford Friedman says this type of literature showed a kind of domination. I mean, a kind of control by the European countries, let's say, and this dominance, lasted for like 300 years, and lead to what we call it a monoculture. So this is, they didn't give it to another culture to be spread, and it is difficult whoever travel to another country to comprehend this kind of literature. That's why Friedman suggests or rethink of world literature based on two assumptions. The first one was admit the multicultural terms. I mean, he is concentrating on multicultural. I mean, making more than one culture. And the second the thing is establishing a policy of systematic changes from world literature into world literatures. So according to many scholars, world literature didn't separate from globalization, and what accompanied that transformation through culture. So the national culture now is meaningless, while the world literature, which is accessible due to the information technology and the developments happened around the world, with regard to everything has to do with the information technology. Goethe support the world literature, which is connected with the information technology and new development took places around the world. All these issues, pushed the scholars to adopt world literature. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Okay, brilliant. Next, who would like to go next?
Me.
Who's that?
Amy. I really enjoy reading this article because before joining your class, I never thought about like what makes a world literature, because I always assume that, oh, Shakespeare is one of like the world literature. I never questioned why Shakespeare is considered as a world literature. And I enjoy like the arguments presented in this article, like again, what makes a world literature a world literature? What basics that it needs to comply in order for a literature to be recognized as a world literature? And I also like the idea of like how you cannot exactly make a certain place a center for all the literature, because um, it will make the literature, it will cause other people to imitate the aesthetic of the center. So which means again less creativity and more similar to other literature. I think this is very important because sometimes we are influenced by the people around us, by the text we just read or anything like that. So it will make the literature less original, I would say. And I also like the idea of how they say that trading literature can cause capitalism. It can cause like the idea of um, lumping everything together to create an illusion of illusionary homogeneity, I think. Yeah. And then the theory that I like the most is actually by David Damrosch, I think, where he said that in order for a literary work to be considered as like the world literature, according to him, has the double process, which is first being read as a literature and then circulating out into a broader world beyond its linguistic and cultural point of origin. So I was wondering first with the problem of his way is, again, how can a literature be considered or be considered as a world literature? That one he gave like no like definition on how it would be considered as a literature. And then the fact that it needs to be popular enough and then circulated out into a border also is a problematic process for me, because not all literature, how literature, I think like reading, if it's not still considered not as a literature, it depends on what the society or the readers at a certain place consider as very good or something like they are interested of. So with all of these different genres, for let's say like in Malaysia, we can see like taking like Malay novel into context, those who were popular, actually for me personally, I'm not enjoying the content because it's always about love and then about rich guys and all of that stuff. So if this novel is popular and then it gets out of the border, then does that novel consider as world literature just because it is popular? That's like the problem I encountered with this approach. But and also like it says that I think yeah, because he said that world literature is writing that gains in translation. So again, the idea of because the literature is popular, that's why it's considered as world literature. So it's like that theory really stuck to me the most than the rest. Yeah,
Right, thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next.
Can I go next?
Lisa, okay.
All right, thank you. I had to actually read this a couple of times because I couldn't quite get it like the first time. There was quite a few definitions, but like what I got from it is like there was a problem with the definition of world literature itself, in terms of like it exerts the particular norms, values, and patterns of reception. So it's almost as if saying, like, for a piece of literature to be considered world literature, it has to be acknowledged by those from the Western or Occidental perspectives. So that's the problem that we have. So if we look at like let's say past works, maybe the Golden Chantonese. It was about, the setting was in Malaysia, but it was written by British during those colonial times. That's what people consider world literature. More than that's what people know, rather than what is written by the Malay themselves. So it's very much Western bias. Everything is from a Western point of view. And when people that are not from like Orient, are not from like Asia, when they read it, they consider like that's what Malaysia was: rivers and jungles and homes with huts. And how do you say? It's almost uncultured the way they describe us. So that's one of the issue of what we consider a world literature is. And I think another issue brought up from this article, let's see, sure where, but it says that because we're now like it's a new century where we're technologically advanced, so the term world literature should be broadened somehow because of the access of networking and internet and all that. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. Who's gonna go next?
I'll go next, Doctor.
Okay.
And I agree with what the rest were saying, but what I can add to the discussion is I love the article address the world making of literature itself instead of the existence of world as opposed to the Western side of it, which is considered universal. So upon reading that article, I just realized, oh, world literature doesn't mean universal. That is not considered universal or, so to speak, English centered. Yeah. So the word literature. I love how they included. I love how world they really constructed the world. They say that the potential in whatever that is not the universal ones. The potential is that the worlds that have been created, they are always open to possibilities. There are multiple worlds that we can explore. And then there are two ways I noticed the writers of the article did that. First, they use Anglophone instead of post-colonial, which I find, oh, why do you do this? Because, we're studying post-colonial. But it turns out because post-colonial is very much dependent on the word colonial. So again, it is, you posit us in a way that is, okay, we're always reacting to the white people, if I may say so myself. So it's always a reaction. So Anglophone is, of course, it's dependent on, on Anglo-English. It is because we have been using the English language for a long time anyway. It has moved beyond us being colonized. We are, even English language itself has evolved in terms of usage and application and even representing culture. Now we have Anglo-Indian literature. I'm not sure what we call the Southeast Asian usage of English yet, but I hope we'll get there soon. Hopefully we have a culture that represents Southeast Asian English one day. And then the second one, I think that stuck with me the most is the inclusion of translatability of the work, because always the mainstream norm is that you always assume that things that were not written in English, they could always be translated. And this has stuck to me even before I read the article, how much gets to stay, how much thing gets to be translated. Hence, the work that was not written in English, they always float, the meaning, the interpretation. If we read in English, we may get a different world from those who read the works in its native language. So that is also something that I find very fascinating. Yeah, and then I'm not going to talk about the capitalism part of it because I find that quite straightforward. Because Europe, I'm not sure. I feel like world literature existed to feed the European need for variety because both, I have to pronounce his name. Yes, so he mentioned that, oh my God, look at this epoch of world literature. We have so many things to read, in addition to our European studies. So yeah, so that is what I get from the article.
Thank you.
I would like to add on what Ruby said about capitalism, right? Because to me, I get the impression that
Shah, are you going next?
I think so, but
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
have much to say. Sorry. Yeah, so I would
Worries.
just like to add to Ruby's point about capitalism, right? So you see, because Anglophones, right, capitalism is, I mean, how do I put this? Like, literature and capitalism is not something that I think it would relate to each other, right? First thing, and then I have this impression that how do we Southeast Asia need to climb up, because first of all, they have they have this definition of world literatures in one thing. So how does the other literature need to like keep up with also the emergence of like capitalism and whatnot? And so I like that one of the line that says participation in literary economy is a mark of privilege, because obviously the others are usually unprivileged, right? So it got to me like, how are we keeping up? But the fact that we have this, like we are deconstructing at the same time, is already like something. It's moving, yeah. So thank you, Doctor.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
No, you see, sometimes even if that one line strikes a chord in you, that's the line that you want to focus on and kind of explore, So yeah, thank you. Who else?
Thank you.
Dr.
Fuzla
Sims, I have a
and
question.
yes. Salim?
Sorry, Doctor. I'm sorry to interrupt, maybe you wanted to ask somebody else. But my question was, what makes us know that the X or the Y text is or consider a world literature? This is something stuck in me. This question raises in my mind. And what makes literature to be world literature and not something else, like as we say, national literature? So this is a question I didn't find an answer for that. Thank you.
Good.
I mean, criteria for Doctor, for considering that this text is a world literature. Thank you.
I understand. I understand the concern that you have raised. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Who would like to go next? Fuzla?
Can I go next? Okay.
Yes.
So I've read the article, and what I gave attention to is the word world making, which I find very interesting, because world making is basically you are creating your own world that is in the world literature itself. So there are many small worlds that are very specific to what the experiences are very specific to that world. So because before this, I did ask about like how about the diasporic literature, right? People who write in that area. So I thought this would be a right fit to it. Like they have their own world in the world literature. So I thought that was very interesting. But then when I read this, the world making, right? There's a lot of different worlds, so it's very wide. And what are the criteria that makes it a world, like one world, and it's very wide and it's very vague. We don't know the parameters that actually makes it one particular world. So I thought that is one question that came up when I read this. And then another one is about an opening of the world literary canon. So because world literary canon is like something that we usually use this text to study. Like everyone uses this text to study. So if we include the post-colonial texts, right, all the marginalized texts, the forgotten ones, I would like to know, like, who has the authority to include these texts, because like, do we rely on the West to include these texts, then there will be a biasness there. But if we are the one who include this text, there will still be bias opinions there, because we will be putting a lot of our own literature, right? So who is in charge is, for me, is something that we need to address. And then there's also the issue of what are the criteria to the inclusion, what makes it a canon, you know. That also is pretty vague for me. And then there's also this part where it seems we are going alongside the market. Something about contemporary literature is not against but alongside the market. It means that you kind of adhere to the market, you follow, because the global market also include translations, right? So you know, you use you can like use the market to know which literature, translated literature to include to when you're doing your study. But then I don't know if this is like a solution to it, because like, you know, even the things that are translated, it adheres to what the West wants. You know, they always translate something that is pertaining to their liking, and not everything is included. So yeah, I think that's also another issue that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Next, Alice.
Yes, doctor. I'm sorry for being late in our class. And there's some problem with my computer, and my network is always lost just now. So
Okay.
being a little late. And when I'm reading the article, what impressed me most is first is all the points or the situation of world literature. World literature has become a password and been accepted by some scholars to help them to analyze literature works. But others believe that world literature is not purely academic, because it seems that world literature is more related to global commodity and Eurocentric power. Then the source of post-colonial literature scholars are cited by the author. In their phrase, world literature is easy to present Eurocentrism and hegemony through the judgment of the West, according to last 300 years history. And it's probably because that in this world, whether critical thinking or other discourses is hardly distributed equally. So some has worried that if world literature becomes popular, the minority will be hard to remain their differences, and literary diversity will diminish. And it's really a difficult work to be equal to every literature in this world. Second, the author explains the significance of rethinking the world literature. Firstly, such an engagement promises to shed light on the frequently conflicting ways in which literature intersects with the complex dynamics of literary theory, literary markets, and educational politics and other agents regulating the literary field. And secondly, the critical consideration of world literature as a concept, field of study, and the institutional framework promises to open up new ways of understanding the network of interconnections that shape the multilingual landscapes of literature at large, and of Anglophone literature in particular. And what made me impressed is, according to Damrosch, the global circulation of literature text is enabled by a linguistic and cultural process of translation, and which sets off a dynamic of transformation. And he points the advantage and disadvantage of translation. First, translation in the world literature has made literature texts in different language read by people who speak and read different languages. Well, during the process of translation has made text different with what is like in its own language. This means that something can be missed or mistaken when the native words and expressions are translated into another languages. So that's all my that's all. And yeah, when I'm reading this article, I can think. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I've gone through everybody, right? I think it's safe to say that the article gave you a lot of things to think about, because you have various ideas and issues coming to the surface. Oh no, Ruby left.
I think it's her Wi-Fi, Doctor.
Oh, I see. Okay. I think it's safe to say that the article gave you a lot of ideas to chew over. Mind the pun with us being fasting and everything else, but you realize very much that the term itself needs to be deconstructed, right? The term world literature is not a clear-cut term as national literature. So if you think about national literature and you look at a particular nation, you can easily identify the works that belong into the corpus called national literature and the works that don't belong. But even then, at the national literature level, people may still argue that emerging writers within that nation might not automatically fit into that canon called national literature. But within the scope of world literature, you are absolutely right. It tends to be more Western-centric, and it tends also to be driven by the popularity of the text. Largely the generation of income based on the publishing houses' popularities, based on a particular author's popularities, right? So you talked about commodity, how literature, it's become an economic transaction, a means for transaction. So you are absolutely right also that even within that world literature scope, there needs to be a kind of carving out of worlds, so that the diversity of the way we see the world today will also be celebrated in that canon called world literature. So I don't think there is a clear-cut answer, especially now with nations that are independent, demanding their voices to be included in that discussion, right? Even if the article focuses primarily on Anglophone world literatures written in a particular language, there is also, as all of you have rightly pointed out, the element of translation. So my literature is not in English. I can get it translated into English, and it can still get in. The Turkish writer Orhan Pamuk, he writes in Turkish, right? But he is definitely well read and considered a highly reputable writer, and also included in the canon of world literature. I'm going to share this screen on. Oh, hi, Ruby. So,
Apologies, my Wi-Fi went off for 2 minutes.
No problem. Okay. So I just want to share with you one way of looking at world literature is maybe to also consider the prize winners, the Nobel Prize winners in literature. It's been almost 120 years that this prestigious prize in literature has been awarded, right? But I just want to kind of go through the list and, you know, all the issues that you all have identified, the Eurocentrism of it, the rather, you know, monocultural perspective, not necessarily monocultural completely, but the rather monocultural perspective of it, you know, that may appear to create a very maybe Eurocentric prize of literature rather than a world prize of literature, you know. So the Nobel Prize, you know, it's awarded to a writer who has done extensively, Nobel Prize in literature, whose canon, whose literary canon kind of encompasses a broad range, you know, over time, you know. So have a look at some of these writers. Look at the country from which the writer wrote and the language. So you've got the first one from France, then Germany, and then Norway, and then again France, and then Spain, and Poland, which was part of Russia back then, and then Italy, and then United Kingdom, then Germany, then Sweden, then Germany again, Belgium. So you get the sense of it being very Eurocentric, right? Even if the languages appear to be more than just English, right? You've got French and German and Spanish, but it is very much predominantly Eurocentric. And then, you know, 12 years into it, you have Tagore being recognized, right? It says there, India, but British Empire. Okay, so because India was still part of the empire at that time, 1940, before 1941. So, and then you've got France, and you've got Sweden, Denmark twice, and Switzerland, Norway, France again, Spain, Ireland, Poland, Ireland, Italy. Again, you see the center very much getting the recognition, and the writers from the center very much being awarded this prestigious prize, right? Germany, and then United States, Sweden, UK. It says stateless, but he was born in the Russian, you know, within Russia. Then Italy, United States, France, United States, Finland, and then during the Second World War period, it was not awarded. There was no award given for literature. And then resuming in 1944, you've got Danish, Spanish, German, French, English from UK, and then from the US, and then UK again. Sweden, France, United Kingdom, United States, Iceland, Spain, okay, France, Soviet Union. So you notice, you know, for the better part of the 20th century, it's very much centered within Europe, the British Isles, and even America, but it's very much there. And then 1967, you've got Guatemala, right? So suddenly you have a kind of a more Latin American acknowledgement or recognition. Then you have Japan. So 67, 68, and then back to, you know, the Europe, the British Isles, America. Then you've got Chile, all right, another South American winner. Then back to Europe, and then America, Europe, and then America, Europe, America, you know, Britain. And then you've got one from Colombia, from the South America, and then back to Europe. And then from the African continent, right? Oleh Soyinka. So just looking at this gives you a sense that this notion of, prize winners, and how, of course, we have to go into the process of how a prize winner is deemed within the Nobel Prize for Literature, how they evaluate. We have to go into that. Orhan Pamuk, for instance, all these writers. You have one from China, the turn of the new millennia, but he's like a diasporic or kind of he has two affiliations, not just to China, but also to France. The writing itself is worth considering. So it's not just English, it's not just languages coming from Europe, but it's been 100 years before you see, and then there was one in Japan, right? There was one from Japan earlier on. What year was that? 68. So then you see the coming of languages outside the center, right? 68, then 94, then 2000, okay? This time, Orhan Pamuk's works in Turkey, so it kind of like it's between, right? Between the West and the East. Turkey is very much in the center there. Then you've got English, you've got French. So I just want to kind of draw your attention to this is one of the most reputable prizes, okay? So imagine if we brought these writers into the canon of world literature, it will still not cover the expense of the world because there are so many other parts of the world not recognized, right? So this is one element that we need to take into consideration. So I want to kind of like just go on into the discussion by also introducing other parameters besides national literature, besides world literature. There are other scopes that we need to also take into consideration, that comparative literature needs to take into consideration. So I'm just going to go straight into today's session. I know you all have questions. We will tie it up later. We will kind of bring it to a kind of round it up later, okay, towards the end of the session. So the terms that I want you to kind of problematize in today's session, as well as in the coming weeks, then this idea of globalization, transmigration, also the heightened nationalism and the nationalistic kind of movements that's happening throughout the world, right? That's creating a kind of inclusive as well as exclusivity in terms of approach to identity. How does that translate into literature, and how does that translate into the study of comparative literature? I suppose that's something we need to also take into consideration. The article, so just a quick recap, what we've talked about these last few weeks. What is comparative literature? We're looking at comparing of texts from different geographical and temporal contexts, i.e. across time, across space, right? So what's the point? What's the purpose of doing comparative literature? It's to create a reading of fiction that deepens our socio-cultural understanding based on representation in literature. It's fictional, but still it allows us to broaden our horizon, our own worldview of the social cultural diversity that is in the world. So we're not just looking at one text from one context, we're looking at one text from one context and another text from another context, and being able to compare the two allows us to see the issue from a multiple perspective. Like, for example, the two poems that we have gone through earlier in the semester, we did I Too, an African-American poem, right, by Langston Hughes. And then we have Identity Card by Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian writer. So just simply putting the two texts side by side and looking at the text for how are they able to connect, what is it that they seem to both be discussing about, and how are they able to create this perspective in you as the reader that allows you to see the issue that you come across based on the two poems. You see the issue from two different perspectives. Sometimes they converge and sometimes they diverge, okay? So comparative literature allows you that space, if you like, right? So the how part is what we will come up with in the coming weeks, the parameters. You know, it has to be a structured methodology. So for today's discussion, you had an article that you looked at which problematized Anglophone Anglophone world literature, and you had your takes. In this particular discussion, I'm going to look at one particular article published in 2007 entitled Reflections on the Crisis of Comparative Literature in Contemporary West by two Chinese scholars, okay? And this problematizing of the crisis that they see in comparative literature in the West will allow us a way to kind of get into the discussion of comparative literature in the 21st century. So I'm going to use this article for two purposes. The first is to get into the discussion of the 21st century. A few weeks back, we looked at the 20th century context. You know, we looked at Henry Remack's definition, Susan Bassnett's definition, 1993 definition. We also looked at Stephen Tutosi's definition of 1998 and the kind of transition of going from one phase to another, and how within the 20th century's definition, the scope is very much Eurocentric, very much Anglo-American, Europe-centered, okay? And this week's discussion and moving into the coming weeks of the semester, we are looking at comparative literature in the 21st century and how we can curate our own learning and research into the domain of comparative literature based on our own operational definition of what is comparative literature, how do we conduct it, and which texts do we bring in to study within the scope of comparative literature. So I'm using this text for that purpose. And the second reason I'm using this article is as a way to kind of prepare you for your first assignment. If you remember your first assignment, you are doing a review of this discipline called comparative literature in the 21st century. And you will be required to identify journal articles that you find relevant, you know, that allows you to make these kinds of statements that you made, you know. Salim had a question just now. What makes us feel a text is or belongs in this domain called world literature? That's a question he wants to answer. So Salim, if that was the question you would like to answer, you will look for articles that supports or helps you answer that question, you know. Ruby had a statement based on her reading of the article on Anglophone world literature. Her thesis, if you like, and I quote Ruby, it seems that this article, quote unquote, feed the European need for variety. So when we are reading an article, the article speaks to us at different levels, right? But at the end of the day, we actually have a question or an idea in mind or a hypothesis in mind that we feel we want to prove. And this article kind of allows us an opportunity to answer that question or to prove that hypothesis. So this is how you conduct a review of literature, you know? So the article itself can be read from multiple perspectives. As you have shown, you know, all of you, each of you had your own take. of what the article means to you, or how it impressed upon you, or how it was significant to you, okay? So the way you kind of identify those key ideas in the article also tells me this is what you are interested in. We are all talking about comparative literature, but within that scope, we can always approach that conversation from our interest, okay? So in your choice of article for your first assignment, you go back to your interest. It has to be, what am I interested in? What do I want to say about this discipline called comparative literature in the 21st century? Which articles will allow me to do that? Okay, so that's how you conduct literature review. You don't just take 5 sets of article and you do a summary of it and then you present. That will be very undergraduate in terms of our approach. But at the graduate level, at the postgraduate level, you come up with a kind of a premise that you are trying to prove, or a hypothesis that you're trying to prove, or even a question that you're trying to answer, a question or two that you're trying to answer. So just very quickly, when I look through this article, lots of questions and ideas come up. But let's begin with the scene that is set by these authors. What is the crisis, in fact, that is happening in the West with regards to world literature? They have identified 3 key crises. Within the first couple of paragraphs of the article, they have identified 3 primary crises. The first is that comparative literature as a method, quote unquote, cannot define the scope of the research. So as a method or as an approach to reading, comparative literature as a scope of reading clashes with comparative literature as a scope of research. So that's the first crisis, that's the first tension. The second crisis is that this idea that you choose one text from one national canon and you choose another text from another national canon and you compare them, the French school's situation of it, it says that French scholars were in fact igniting a warfare of cultural prestige, conceiving of literature as quote unquote indicator of national psychology. This is a crisis, according to these authors, that you assume one text represents the psyche or the subconscious ideas of the nation. That is a crisis in itself, because no one text can represent the plethora of communities in that nation, right? It's largely because of the monocultural perspective of the past that this idea was valid. But now with globalization, transculturalism, multiculturalism, each nation does not hold one psyche. There's multiple psyches within that nation because of the multiple communities and heritages in that nation. So that's the second crisis. The third crisis is that, according to the authors, comparative literature from the Western perspective, they have lost their scope and focus. I think that's the main crisis, if you like, And because of that, it seems as if comparative literature is not valid anymore, okay? So what the authors are in fact problematizing is, how come comparative literature seem to be more and more relevant in the Eastern schools, in the Eastern universities, outside the centers, outside Europe, outside the Anglo-American universities? Why is it that universities outside these centers, these traditional centers of scholarship on comparative literature as well as literature generally, these outside centers are now gaining momentum, especially in the scope of comparative literature? And one of the things that they talk about, the bits that's highlighted in red, underlined in red, I want to kind of focus on that. As comparative literature in the West has been limited to the circle of Western civilization, where there are more similarities than differences, scholars from Europe and North America have yielded substantial results in seeking for similarities in literary relationship between different nations. However, in the globalization age, literature from different civilizations are in unavoidable exchange. You cannot overlook civilizations coming from outside of Europe and North America. This is the first crisis that needs to be addressed. And that's the issue that I feel the scholars are in fact problematizing. And this is taking up also what Salim talked about and a few others talked about, this comparison. How do you make the comparison? The second quote that I want to draw your attention to from this article is in the second, within the same paragraph, and I quote, "We have got used to putting writers and works from various literatures together and find out similarities on the surface. However, we are not able to dig into the heterogeneity beneath this shallow X and Y or X in Y comparison." So this is the second thesis, if you like, that these scholars are proposing, that when we're making comparison, like for instance, Identity Card and I Too by Langston Hughes, by Mahmoud Darwish and Langston Hughes, it's no longer enough to look at the text and say, oh, they are similar because. But it is important to go deeper into it, as you all did a couple of weeks ago, by bringing in the context, by understanding the background and the historical premise from which both poets captured it in their poems, and how the historical context of the Harlem Renaissance, of the African American struggle for civil liberty, as well as the Palestinians' ongoing struggle for freedom of their own nation, to have a nation state of their own that is recognized, and to have a sovereign state of Palestine. All that needs to be brought into the discussion. And how are they similar with each other? How are they different? So we need to dig deeper. I think this is also our challenge in the 21st century, to dig into the heterogeneity beneath the shallow X and Y or X in Y comparison. And another issue that we also need to think about as a 21st century student of comparative literature is in the page below, page 4. And I quote, "Besides, the literary tradition in the West is quite different from the Middle East and the Far East. Thus, the attempt to seek for similar poetic mode between them might not be labored." It's that notion of what is poetic in the Middle East and what is poetic in the Western framework, and what is poetic in the Southeast Asian and Asian and context, and the East Asian context are different. This is not one term that can be fit into the different civilization. It's not one size fits all, right? That is also something that we need to problematize. And I think comparative literature allows us that scope, allows us the opportunity to say what is poetic from this perspective, from the Eastern perspective, from the Middle Eastern perspective, from even the African perspective, is different from what is poetic from the Eurocentric as well as Anglo-American perspective. And this need to be mindful, to be aware that there is differences, to be open for that, is largely because of globalization, is largely because of transculturalism, transnationalism, is largely because of the post-colonial nature of our nation states. So we have the opportunity to have our voices heard in this century within 21st century comparative literature. I'm going to skip this. So coming to your situation, what you talked about earlier and how you problematize this idea of world literature, you're right that, most of you in the way you have reviewed the article on Anglophone of comparative literature, world literature Anglophone, that the problem with the Western schools definition of world literature is it's very much, and I quote this from the article here, is very much quote literature in the West. They mistakenly thought there's no literature in the East. Or, which is worse, if there is any literature in the East, quote unquote, it is not significant. It's not worthy. Earlier on, these writers problematized the idea of the worthiness. How do you define the worthiness of a work of literature? So some of you also quoted on Damrosch's definition, and this article summarizes the three key focuses on how David Damrosch, the professor of comparative literature, how he captures the idea of world literature. What are the three focuses? And this is the bits highlighted in blue here. To summarize, Damrosch draws the conclusion that world literature is dynamically formed in the process of circulation, translation, and production. Okay, so the idea that world literature is not just world literature because of its circulation. It can also be world literature because of how it is incorporated into the canon due to translation, right? And it is both the way we read the text, the mode of reading, and it is also the way we engage with the different worlds that is in that scope. Fuzla talked about the diasporic worlds, creating spaces and experiences that are deemed significant. I agree with you that, Fuzla, that there is vagueness in this idea of worlds, but because of the vagueness, we can in fact begin to construct our own operational term. Sometimes when the word is vague, when the concept is vague, you can propose your definition. When we talk about worlds, what are we talking about? We're talking about migrant worlds, we're talking about diasporic worlds, we're talking about transgenerational worlds, we're talking about transcultural worlds. So what kind of worlds do we mean? So this is something that the 21st century conversation of comparative literature, we can bring that in. We have the opportunity to bring that in. Okay, so I see the open-endedness of these terms as an opportunity for us to make our own suggestions, valid suggestions based on research, based on our own studies. And this is where you come in with your first assignment. When you look at your first assignment, look at it as an opportunity for you to suggest something concrete rather than for you to just repeat and regurgitate what other scholars have said. Make a conscious decision and say, look, in my mind, given my level of understanding and my scholarship or lack of, this is how I propose world literature to mean. This is how I propose comparative literature to be viewed and to be read and to be studied. So you get an opportunity to do that. You get an opportunity to build this discipline of comparative literature, with that idea of the world in mind, coming from your perspective, coming from China, for Alice, coming from Iraq, for Salim, coming from Malaysia, for the rest of you. So you need to understand that your ideas are as valid as any of these other scholars. Don't wait for them to say something for you to then agree. Propose something through your own concerted effort. So I think this is the key that I want to kind of leave you all with. And the final part of this article is the idea of translation. And the writers suggest something significant. I want to spend a little bit of time to look at the bits highlighted here, the last bits here. They quote from the article on world literature. Translation has been vital not only in building up national and cultural identities, but also in constructing a literature with the potential to cross the boundaries of language and nations, as well as those of literary and cultural traditions. So think about it this way, you know, if we did not have translation or translated text, we can't read, you know, almost half, if not most of the articles, the short stories in this collection alone, right? So what translation has done for literature, specifically comparative literature also and world literature, is allowed the bridging of nations and cultures, as well as language, by opening up the scope of comparative literature, by bringing in texts from other cultures and other linguistic boundaries. And the author is also proposing an important idea that looking at translation or the translated literary text as a way to create a more global culture, a conversation that we need to kind of take into consideration. That literature is little known to the world in at large, and it is because of the translated works that the world is able to understand. For instance, modern Chinese literature. For instance, the text that we will be reading is not here with me, Kuwaiti literature, you know. So, you know, I want us to kind of have that kind of understanding as we approach the coming weeks when you start to select texts. Your understanding and your definition of comparative literature is also connected to your understanding and your definition of world literature. Which text do you want to bring in? Which text do you want to study? And how would these texts fit within your own understanding of world literature, within your own understanding of comparative literature? Okay, so that's basically what these scholars are suggesting. So a few more slides before we conclude the lecture, and then I open up to our discussion. So you think about comparative literature, you know, in the 20th century, and they're looking at it from the Western perspective. This idea of post-colonial context was not part of the discourse. But today, as scholars from the you know, Eastern schools, universities, from the Southeast Asian, Asian schools, African schools, Middle Eastern schools of comparative literature, African schools, West Caribbean, the Caribbean and West Indies schools of comparative literature. As we propose these new ideas, we are thinking through our context of post-colonial experience, right? So questions that we might want to consider is, how does comparative literature address that post-colonial context? How does comparative literature address the multicultural context in today's nation? So the colonial experience, they continue to color how our writers write about their nation. You know, Malaysian writers, Indian writers, writers from various parts of Africa. They write from that post-colonial perspective. So we need to take that into consideration when we think about comparative literature and the post-colonial context. Another element that we also need to talk about is the multicultural context. You know, I know every nation today has its own level of multiculturalism, especially with mass migration for economic and social advancement. Nation can no longer hold the monocultural perspective, the you know, one domain or one culture or one ethnic perspective. It's unthinkable today. So it's no longer just representing a particular culture, language, and identity for one nation. So because of this, literature also needs to kind of have a more heterogeneous perspective. So this comes back to Ruby's and Fuzla's picking up from the article about world making, right? So this idea of world making versus the Western perspective. So how do we approach that from our perspective? What worlds are we talking about from our perspective, from the Chinese perspective, from the Iraqi perspective? Salim is a Kurd, you know, so it's not just Iraq homogeneously as one. Even within Iraq, you've got multiple worlds or multiple perspectives. That needs to also be taken into consideration. And finally, the global context with globalism and you know this idea that we are no longer just a member of a particular nation, we are also part of this global context. So given the national nature of many of today's writers are no longer just saying themselves they're Pakistani writer, or they are a Malaysian writer, or they are, you know, Japanese writer, or they are Iraqi writer. They tend to have dual citizenship and dual perspectives also. So their focal point is no longer from one nation's perspective. So we need to also incorporate that discussion in our world making from comparative literature's perspective. So each writer brings that element of their world into the world that they create, especially writers that have this in-between kind of, you know, the hybrid identity. More so the bicultural writers. So you've got in the text that you will be reading, you know, this bicultural element to the discussion. One is by a writer who is a bicultural writer, Trevor Noah, and another one, Sanat's work is about a character who is bicultural. So how do you contest those issues? So these are questions I'm going to leave you with for your first assignment. So when you're thinking about your first assignment and you're thinking about which article and articles do I choose for my first assignment, consider the issues that we have discussed. How does the current discourse in comparative literature reflect post-coloniality, multiculturalism, and globalization? Secondly, is comparative literature only interested in the canonical works? Definitely not, right? Your review today also signals that. So what about works from other worlds, right? Works produced by post-colonial writers, by non-native migrant writers, by transnational diasporic writers. How are they relevant to the discipline of comparative literature? Maybe some of you might be interested to review about that from the perspective of comparative literature. So what do current scholars say about this? You can use the first assignment as an opportunity to drop your thoughts into the pool of discussions, or into this ongoing conversation. So basically that's the lecture, the session. So it's a long process that I kind of, you know, I put it all together and tried to kind of summarize it. So there's a lot of things to digest. I'm going to give you 10 minutes break. Let's meet at 3:30 and tell me your questions and your ideas and your comments, and bring up anything that you feel you want to kind of explore, or you might want to explore for your first assignment. Okay, is that all right?
Yes, Doctor.
Yeah. So let's take a 10 minutes break. I'll see you all back at 3:30.
Okay, doctor.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I hope everybody's back. Let's just take another half an hour or so to conclude today's class. So I'm opening the discussion to your questions and your comments, and I'm going to field them as much as I can. I'm not saying I'm going to answer them for you, but together we're going to sort it out. So who would like to go first? If you've got, based on the session that I gave just now, you may have an issue that you want to probe, or you may have a question in mind that you feel like this is something I want to explore further. So I just would like to hear from you. What did you think about today's session, the lecture just now? What was your takeaway from it? Oh, sorry, Aimee was out. Okay, yeah, yes. Salim, did you want to say something?
No, just Doctor, I want to ask a question. Is the question that I raised about the world literature? So
Yeah.
You mean that I have to find out an article to answer this question? Am I right or not?
You have to find other scholars and see how they approach their definition of world literature, and whether that approach is something you are comfortable with.
Okay.
This is how we use literature review. This is how we do literature review. You use authors and scholars who have published their thoughts and their ideas. You use them as a kind of a support, but you must start by having an opinion to begin with. You don't start from zero. You have an opinion, and your opinion is what you are trying to prove. Maybe you want to say that the use of translation in world literature and in comparative literature is something that we need to take into consideration. Whose opinions are you using to support these arguments? It cannot be based primarily on your own thoughts, because we have not developed ourselves to the level of scholarship, right? If you are a scholar, people are quoting you, like Damrosch, all these other scholars. But when you are a student of the subject, you want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to use these scholars as my guide, and their ideas and their operational definition will help me form my own working definition. So yeah, that's the gist of it.
Okay, so we have to find out a hypothesis first, as I understand you.
If you can develop a hypothesis, that would be great. But if you want to start with a question, you can as well. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Got it. Thank you.
So any comments based on the lecture just now, or even questions? Yeah.
Yeah, let me just add. I think not just this subject, but other subjects as well. I guess because we are a post-colonial department, so there is a lot of discussion about the Western Hemisphere being the center. But from my reading experience, I read a lot of Asian writers who translated or diasporic and whatnot. So I'm very interested with in the conflict of the periphery literature. Is that the correct term? I don't know. But that is not the center. They were considered periphery, because I believe the conflict, why do I say conflict? But then yes, I believe that the conflict among Asian literatures, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, so these Asian, even though they like to lump us together, even among us, I think the conflict is a lot richer there, even though it is not explored. So the thing that I'm most interested in is, first, post-colonial. I think the post-colonial world is different from countries like Japan, China, and Thailand, who have not been colonized. Because I noticed the writers from those countries, they write about certain themes in a different way that, say, Malaysian writers write it. or say Philippines writer write it, because we are still quite Eurocentric in our thinking, cannot help because our education. Say Japanese writers, they write in a very like in a different way that I noticed. So but then what do we call those countries then if they're not post-colonial? Because they are not considered the center in literature.
Ruby,
So,
you
yeah.
may be interested. You may be interested in this book.
That is the term. I was just guessing periphery literature. So it is a good. Thank you so much, Doctor.
So that's how we do it. I mean, I just Googled what you said, peripheral literature, and when I Googled peripheral literature, I got these possible options. But of course, it's just based on one book. So
Yeah.
you may want to look at this writer's take on that concept and see how that concept fits within the domain of comparative literature. So you notice the kind of the context of the discussion based on the content. You see the discussion of world literature coming up. You see the discussion of translation coming up. So yeah, that's one possibility. Basically, that's how you do it. That's you begin by asking a question. You begin by looking at a nagging idea in your mind. You begin by saying that, I read this article and this is the thing that came to me, which is what I asked you to do, right? So you've read the article that we discussed earlier, and all of you had your own takes on it, and you heard other people's takes on it as well. So based on that discussion, you may ask yourself, what exactly am I interested in? So in order to be able to come up with a hypothesis, as Salim was saying just now, you cannot start with a hypothesis. You may begin with a nagging question. You may begin with an inquisitive thought that you want to probe. But it starts with you reading the text, coming up with an idea in mind, and then exploring it. And Google it to begin with, especially if you've got some keywords, and then you go moving on from there. Okay? Next.
Can I go next, Doctor?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, after my review of the article and this lecture, and I found myself interested in the translation in comparative literature and world literature, and I want to search something to see how translation, the importance of translation in world literature and comparative literature, and how translation influence the world literature and comparative literature, and maybe I think I can give some suggestions on how people to see think the translation in comparative literature and world literature. And during the last 10 minutes break, I searched some the translation in comparative literature on Google Scholar, and they found some articles about it. I think I can do it. Yeah.
Good. I think your dog wants to join us as well. Hello, puppy. Yeah. So my cat wants to join also because she loves to hear people talk. So yeah, I'm Googling right now translation in comparative. Oh, sorry, I didn't share the screen.
Yeah, so I should limit the time from the 2000
I would say look for articles in the last 4 or 5 years if you can. Don't like, for instance, this one, introduction, comparative literature and translation. That's very much the 20th century discourse. You don't want to bring that in. So look at articles that are more recent, and based on those articles, come up with a kind of a question that you want to probe. So you say you want to kind of make an argument or a case for the importance of translation in comparative literature. Yeah, you can do that. So look at these articles, these potential articles, but make sure they are journal articles, not like blog posts or lecture notes. Make sure they are proper articles, and if possible, look at articles that are coming from the Eastern schools rather than from maybe from India, maybe from China, as well as in Asia region. Okay.
Okay, doctor. Thank you very much.
What else? Who would like to go next?
Okay. I'm the same as Alice as well. I'm sort of like interested in like the translation aspect of it, because after hearing about like the Nobel Prize that you showed us, I was wondering like what criteria it takes to actually win a prize in literature. Does a work have to be translated into English for it to win? It does.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
So it means does it like not make more sense if actually the panel of judges, like board of directors, are multilingual themselves? Because it's hard to judge a translated piece of work, because no language is ever the same. There are some words like in Malay or in Chinese that there's no similar meaning to it in English. So yeah, so that's one of the issue I have.
So you may narrow your scope to the concern, your specific concern, prize winners or Nobel Prize winners of literatures, and how would that be considered within the domain of comparative literature. Just Google that and see the kind of hits that you get there. Okay, good, brilliant. Who wants to go next?
May I? Because okay, maybe Sally go first. It's okay.
Sure.
No, that's okay. You have to stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So just now I googled sorry.
Want to share screen? Show us what you Google and.
It's okay. Like I googled who decides what literature is the best at first, and then of course there's an answer that says agents and literary journals, and then consumers in established society. And that actually intrigued me, like how do we know, like, okay, established society, who is the established society? And then like what Lisa questioned just now, because I have this question, how do we elevate the works of our people? How do we elevate the work of Southeast Asian at least, right?
I was just thinking about that, Cha. I was like, so we have so how do we push out work of other cultures? I was just thinking about it.
And then I came with like just the same like Lisa's question, like should it be translated first for it to be, for it to be there and not be at the bottom? And yeah, I was just, playing around that, like established society, like who.
So a question that you may want to probe, Shah, if you're interested in that, is to look at the role of the critique.
In the
comparative literature domain, in the discourse, the role of the reader or the critique, not just reader as in the popular masses, those who are buying the books, i.e. the researchers, the scholars of this discipline called comparative literature. So what's your role? You notice in the first couple of weeks when we were looking at comparative literature, I always showed you the role of the student or the role of the professor or the role of the teacher of comparative literature. So all of us play a role. So in answer to your question, how do you elevate your writers or writers from your region? The critique plays a role. You and I, in our capacity as students, as researchers, as scholars of this subject, we play a role. So by publishing our work, our thoughts, our ideas, we are mooting an idea. And when it garners enough traction and enough people are championing the same concern, you are able to kind of create a significant voice in the world, you know? So I am asking you now to look at what other scholars are saying, but later you may be able to publish your thoughts and say, you know what, this is what I feel. You send it out to a journal, they review it, they think it's scholarly enough, you know, academically sound, scholarly enough, impactful enough, and they publish it. And then somebody else is going to read your work and have this exact same kind of a conversation, you know, criticizing, deconstructing, unpacking what you have said. So I think this is where we come in, the conversation that we are having, this micro level conversation that we are having in our class. If we kind of imagine it being expanded across the globe, this is the kind of impact that we are making. You know, writers do their part, but scholars and students and critics, we have a role to play as well, right? And the prize giving committees, they have their role as well. So we each need to play our part in order for us to make the kind of change we want to see. Okay, all right, good.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
All right, Salim, did you want to say something?
Sorry, Doctor, just you said it's good to, you know, set up a hypothesis or a question. So is it possible, for example, to build up my assignment on such a question? What are the best criteria for choosing a text to be compared? Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, definitely. But you may get the answer. You may get different answers when you look at scholars from the American schools, from the European schools, from the Chinese schools, from the African schools, from the Indian schools, right? So be prepared to have a range of criteria. So it's not like one criteria, right? Because as we have seen, the French school, they have their own set of criteria. The American school, they've got their own set of criteria. So even the criteria is not going to be a universally regarded one. It's not. We're not going to all agree on the same criteria. But your proposal of what should the criteria be, your proposal will be based on the scholars that you use to inform you in this selection process. Okay, so yeah,
you
but
mean what
that's
majority?
a good question.
Sorry, you mean what majority scholars agreed on?
Even that is problematic, Salim, because majority from where? From which part of the world?
Right.
Majority from the Eastern schools, majority from the Western schools, majority from which, you know? So it's difficult to find a consensus, you know, but you cannot stop there. So you're going to say, okay, the significance of my proposal is I'm coming up with the best criteria that these scholars find useful. The limitation of my proposal is I'm only looking at a particular school of comparative literature, a particular perspective. Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, good. Aimi and Fuzla, would you all like to go next?
Can I go next?
Ken.
Okay. So because I was talking about world making, right? So I'm actually really interested in the concept because I think that it is a good concept because it can be like a very
what concept?
inclusive
What
world
concept?
making.
Mm-mm.
The world making, the worlding. Because I think like it's very like inclusive. So I would like to explore further on that concept, like what can we, how we construct the world making, and you know, all the like the challenges in like applying the world making. So I'm pretty interested in looking at that aspect. I googled some articles.
Do you wanna share anything?
There's this one, but I haven't like read through everything. It's just that
Sure.
there's some that I found from like Chinese. I think it's a Chinese scholar. So they talk about world making. So I don't know if it's. I think it'd be interesting to read this one.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought I would like to explore on that.
Okay, go forth and explore that. That's a great start. Brilliant. Aimee?
Again, I'm actually very much interested in the genre of the world literature. Is the world literature only tied to the post-colonial or the nation building genre? So I was wondering if, again, I'm interested in what you said in the lecture just now about whether the contemporary literature can be brought into the term of world literature, and also whether this world literature again can only be given the title as world literature based on either the impact the literature makes to the readers, or maybe by the popularity or the acceptance of readers toward what the literature is trying to bring forward, or maybe because of the controversies arise after the literature is introduced to the readers. But I don't know exactly what I'm looking at, but I just know that I'm very interested in the genre area, because to me, when I read those so-called the world literature, a lot of, maybe because I'm in this post-colonial courses, so a lot of it focus on post-colonials. So I also I really enjoy reading them, but I was wondering if contemporary literature that are produced by today's generation can be as the same level as this literature that I'm learning about. So that's the main area that I'm interested in.
There are other terms, contemporary, emergent, emerging, at the beginning, I remember about 15 so years ago, it was called new literatures in English. 15, 20 years ago, it was considered new literatures in English. So the term has evolved, but the concern is very much what happens to new writers, to writers who are only recently entering the publishing domain, whose works are critical, but have not reached the maybe readership level, maybe reputation that prize winners and writers who have developed a reputation in their craft. Maybe those writers have a different kind of a standing. What happens to emerging writers? So yeah, I think this is something we need to problematize, and you could do that. You could use this assignment as an opportunity to kind of put your thoughts into it and include your thoughts into that conversation. So I'm glad that all of you have a kind of a scope in mind when you're with regards to what you're interested in. So I just want to, before we end, tie it all back together to our course synopsis and the learning outcome as well as the assignment, because I think it's important for you to know where am I heading with this assignment, with the kind of things that I'm doing. What's the purpose? What's the end goal? Where am I going with this? So if you remember this at the beginning of the semester, I briefly went through your course file with you. So as you know, one of the learning outcome of this course is for you to demonstrate critical awareness of the history of comparative literature, as well as the divergent schools of thought and their fundamental differences. And tie it to contemporary concerns. You're connecting the discussion of comparative literature with current issues, the current concerns. So the issues of the 20th century and the issues of even the 21st century in the third decade is different. So it depends on your scope, it depends on your focus, right? So you have an opportunity to raise these concerns that you are interested in based on the task at hand. So the task at hand is you must use at least 3 critical essays on comparative literature and conduct a review of the discipline. So some of you are interested in looking at the peripheral literature, others are interested in looking at translation and looking at emerging writers, looking at how we can actually elevate writers and their station, looking at world making, looking at the genre of world literature and what that means in the current situation, looking at how to choose a text or texts for comparative literature, whose opinions do we bring in. So, if you look at the question, it's very open-ended, it's very broad. So your discussion may include some of these ideas. Discuss the difference in perspective between the Western school and the Eastern school, right? You must bring up the 20th century context in order to discuss the 21st century scenario. You cannot ignore the past in your rush to create a new statement for the 21st century. You cannot ignore the past, right? So in your review, you need to also take into consideration the previous schools of comparative literature, just very briefly, how it was defined, how comparative literature was viewed, how the methodology has changed from the 20th century to the 21st century, and what is the current state of comparative literature based on these scholars. So in so doing, you are then able to reach the learning outcome 1 and a little bit of the learning outcome 4. Okay, so to kind of remind you, we have done the first 4 weeks looking at comparative literature, and video essay is your first assignment. That is next week. So next week, in fact, we won't have a lecture slot, but the entire week you can do consultations with me. Including Thursday class. Thursday class, you can sign up for consultation. You can show me your thoughts, your ideas, your draft, what you're working on. But the video essay is due Friday of that week. Next Friday. It's due next Friday morning. But if you need a little bit more time, I can push it a little bit, but I don't want to exceed beyond the weekend. So I would like this video essay, this 10-15 minute video essay to be your idea or your conceptualizing of the state of comparative literature in the 21st century, depending on your interests, depending on your questions that you are trying to ask and you're trying to moot. You have an opportunity to have your voice heard through this video essay. Any questions?
Yes, Doctor. Actually, about your assignment, it counts as the UKM folio assignment, right? So,
all right, Lisa, because you're not registered with this course, you can share the video essay on our WhatsApp group, and then we will get a chance to go through it.
Okay, I see. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. Okay, but use it as an opportunity, to make a statement about the state of comparative literature as you understand it based on your reading. It doesn't have to be your reading doesn't have to be broad. It can be, based on a few selected articles, but even based on those few selected articles, you have an opinion. That's what I'm in fact trying to gauge. And based on today's session, your review of the article that we looked at, the world literature article that we looked at, you have an opinion. And in fact, you can use that article as well for your final assignment. That's one of the articles that you may use. as well as the article that I shared today with you. You know, you can use any articles, but try to use articles that are more recently published. That way you gauge the state of comparative literature in the last few years rather than like a decade ago or 2 decades ago. You know, because 21st century it's already in our 3rd decade. So if I say 21st century and you're using articles from 2001, 2002, 2003, it's a little bit dated, you know? So you want to try to challenge yourself by looking at scholars that are more recently published. So in the article that I shared with you just now, that was published in a particular journal of comparative literature. So you may look at that journal, Comparative Literature and Culture. You may look at that journal and look at the kind of discussion that they are having about the state of comparative literature. That also tells you, because that article is published in an American journal from Purdue University. But the fact that the article challenges the state of comparative literature in the West and proposes kind of an approach to comparative literature from the Chinese school already tells you this is how we bring our opinion into the conversation. You know, you come up with an idea, you write your critical thoughts, you publish it in these journals and allow your voice to be heard. That's one way of kind of breaking in and kind of having a conversation. Okay? Any questions?
Doctor Salim, go first.
Yeah, Salim?
Go first. It's okay.
Oh, okay. Liz?
Okay, doctor. So next week we won't have a class like this,
we don't have a lecture. We don't have a lecture.
But we can have a personal consultation. Yeah.
You can have consultation, and the consultation doesn't have to be on Thursday. That means, you know, if you say, "Can I see you Monday? I want a short consultation on Monday and again on Thursday," you can. So I leave it to you. This is very much independent independent research week. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that I should be earlier than others because next week I will take an examination in China for English majors. I need to fly to Hainan Island from my hometown and to take this examination. So the flight is on Thursday. Yeah. Okay. Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. So okay. I think I can be earlier than others.
Yeah.
A little earlier.
But the actual assignment, I want it in latest by Sunday evening. Okay? Because next week will be the whole week for you to work on it. So I'm basically giving time for you to do a 10 to 15 minute video essay based on your readings of comparative literature. So I'm not going to give you any work during the week. I'm not even giving you any lectures. You can use the time you know, to your advantage to complete the task. If you finish it fast and you want to upload it on UKM Folio, you can do that. Okay, but if you want to see me earlier on, you may even start seeing me beginning tomorrow. Maybe you already have an idea and you want to move something with me, you can. Tomorrow morning I'm free, evening from 3 o'clock onwards I'm on a workshop for the weekend, so I'll be away. So morning tomorrow is Friday, right? Yeah, tomorrow is Friday. I've lost track of time, honestly. Yeah, so okay, so you can start as early as tomorrow. For those of you who are in Malaysia and you know, China at the time, I start work very early because after sahur, after subuh, I'm at my workstation at home. You know, so if you want to do consultation, don't wait till later part of the day. Whatever time you are ready. So I had a supervision with a student from Dubai this morning, and his time was 6 o'clock. 4 hours difference. My time was 10 o'clock. So he had just finished his subuh. He had just finished his morning prayer and sahur, and he just did consultation with me immediately. So I'm okay. You know, you all can do that. So basically, from 7 o'clock onwards, I'm at my station, and my workstation. You know, so but by the later part of the day, I wither. I droop like a plant without any water. I start to droop. So yeah. So let me know if you need to consult with me, but I know you all have something to say. So I'm glad we had this discussion, because listening to all of you, I know each one of you have your own perspective and your own take. Run with that. Just go with that. Don't keep second guessing yourself like, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? No, you know what you're interested in, just go straight into it. Cut to the chase and go pursue whatever it is that you feel you have this inkling towards. That's usually a safe bet. You know, not that we're betting, but yeah. Okay. All right, Salim. You had a question. Okay, Ren, quickly get it done so that you can go off on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Welcome. Salim?
Sorry, Doctor. Since it's my first semester and I don't have that experience, I'm not that experienced person in making essay videos. So is there a sample? Yeah, on can you, for example, send a sample on that, just to follow the same instructions and follow the. Since I'm not experienced with that, sorry, Doctor. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. That's. I had a student from Iraq last semester. In the first semester, I think you all know her. And her first video essay in the first semester.
Ali?
Was Huda.
Oh, Huda, yeah.
So she went through a steep learning curve, but it's pretty straightforward. I'll do that. I'll share with you some examples.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. Anything else? So I'm not looking for technically savvy video essays. I'm not looking for, you know, the technology doesn't need to be terribly advanced. It could be as simple as you sitting in front of your phone, talking about it, recording it, uploading it on YouTube, giving me the link. Class, done. It can be as simple as that. Okay, but then, you know, some of you might go on YouTube or, you know, explore some ideas of how to make a video essay. There are many ways, but the more important thing is, what do you have to say, first of all? You start with that first. Okay, right? Any other questions? And the reason I'm asking you to do a video essay is because some of you may want to use audio, visual, you know, certain kind of other technologies besides the words. There will come a time when you have to write your essays. That goes without saying, right? But we want to showcase other talents and other skill sets that we have developed. Okay, so IT literacy is as important as literacy, as in reading, you know, the ability to read. You also want to be able to develop your other literacies. Technology literacy is also as important, especially in the 21st century. So that's why the video essay is there, to kind of flex that muscle, help you flex that muscle, especially for those of us who are not familiar with it. You want to go online, look at how video essays are done, you know, so, but I will send you some samples as well. Okay. Any other questions or concerns? So I would recommend that you begin, you message me, you know, with a slot as soon as you have some idea of which articles am I looking at, maybe even draft out some thoughts and maybe meet me for consultation. Don't wait too late. Okay? All right, very quickly, Aimee, any comments, questions, concerns?
I just like Googling articles, you know, about the emerging literature. I think I will just arrange first what points I want to put in the video essay, and after I have some sort of draft, I contact you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. If you have like a PowerPoint or even a document draft, you may even email it to me for me to just have a quick look to give some pointers. you know, so don't need to wait until we are that I have a free slot or whatever, because I'm quite good to kind of give you response that way. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa, anything that you would like to raise?
Nothing else, Doctor. Thank you.
Great. Shah?
I will start my exploration first and then it will come to you. But yeah, I think I will have soon a lot of questions on how to like construct and connect the dots and everything. So yeah, I will contact you, Doctor. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
brilliant. Thank you. Ruby?
I'm wondering if the assignment is limited to journal articles. What about book chapters?
Ken?
Oh, book chapters are good. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Book chapters. It's just that when I say books, it might kind of create a mental block, you know, whereas journal articles is a lot more accessible online, you know. So yeah, but yeah, anything academic. It can be book chapters, book, journal articles. Yeah, can.
Thank you, Doctor. That's all.
All right, cool. Salim, any questions?
Thank you, Doctor. Just I forget to say happy Ramadan Mubarak on all of you. And inshallah, I will pray for all of you, inshallah.
Thank you, Salim.
Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan.
Yeah. Fuzla, any questions or comments?
No questions so far. I'm still exploring.
Yeah. Thank you. Alice?
Oh, so far I'm okay, Doctor.
Okay, so thank you so much. This has been a good session. So with this session, we wrap up the theory part of our discussion. Okay, so you will demonstrate your understanding, your learning with the assignment next week. Then when we meet again week 6, we begin looking at textual analysis. So since I'm not going to see you as a class next week, I would like to recommend that you begin reading some of the stories. Which are the ones? Sorry.
The Yellow Bird.
The first one is The Yellow Bird, is it?
I think it is.
Yes. The first focus would be comparative literature and national literary canon. We're looking at the text primarily will come from these two, The Yellow Bird by Kevin Powers and The Corpse Washer by Sinan Antun. So have a look at those as the primary focus. I will be using them primarily for the two focus of week 6 and week 7. But you may also use short stories from this collection, Other Voices, Other Vistas. But those collections will also come in handy later in the other parameters. Okay, so the first parameter, we're looking primarily on national literary canon, keeping in mind this idea that the nation state is no longer homogeneous, right? So the first parameter kind of makes it look as if we're looking at it from a homogeneous perspective. And then the second week, week 7, we look at it from a more global, post-colonial, multicultural perspective. Okay, so for week 6, please try to finish reading The Yellow Bird and The Corpse Washer, and then we will have a discussion on that. And I would like your takes on both novels. You know, so at the end of each novel, please write down your thoughts. What was your what were the moments that kind of stood out for you? Which characters stood out for you? Maybe you might even want to highlight certain things in the book that you want to kind of discuss. Do the same with The Corpse Washer. I'm trying to bring my PhD student who is looking at Sinan Antun's novels. He is in Iraq, but he's a full-time lecturer also, full-time faculty member. So I will work with him with a schedule, and he will he will give a kind of an overview about Sinan Antun, the writer, and the kind of characters that Sinan Antun develops. So we will have a guest lecturer, so that should be fun as well. So please make sure you read the novels in the coming week as well. Okay. All right. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody. This was another pleasurable experience for me. So
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank
I
you,
think we
Doctor.
all of us enjoyed it so much.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. For those of you who are fasting, enjoy the fast and have a good iftar as well, and take care of
Inshallah.
yourself.
Thank you.
And I'll see you individually next week. Okay?
Inshallah.
All right. Bye-bye. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Doctor.
Waalaikumsalam.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye,
Doctor.
everyone.
Bye.
Have a good
Doctor,
day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.